Wir starten mit dem ersten Panel. Und wenn ihr wollt, Joachim, könnt ihr euch schon aufs Panel begeben. Joachim Bauer wird dieses erste Panel moderieren und ihn stelle ich kurz vor und Joachim wird dann die Kollegin des Panels vorstellen. Professor Joachim Bauer ist Kurator und Professor für empirische Kulturwissenschaft am Institut für Kunst und materielle Kultur der TU Dortmund. Er lehrt und forscht zu Repräsentationen von Migration, Analysen materieller Kultur, Geschichte und Zukunft des Museums, kuratorische Theorie und Praxis. Mit einer Kollegin, Katrin Pieper, betreibt er seit 2010 das Büro zusätzlich die Exponauten, Ausstellungen etc. in Berlin und hat gerade mit diesem Büro zahlreiche Ausstellungen selbst gemacht, kuratiert, unter anderem zum Beispiel die Basisausstellung im Forum Wissen in Göttingen 22 und seit 2023 sind wir zusammen im ICOM-Vorstand aktiv. Ein schönes Panel.
Vielen Dank, Felicia, für die freundliche Einführung. Ich freue mich sehr, dass es jetzt losgeht mit unserer inhaltlichen Auseinandersetzung über die Frage, wie politisch ist Museumsarbeit. Ich werde für dieses erste Panel jetzt auf Englisch wechseln. Programming as a guiding line of museum work, or the question, how political is museum work? The opening panel has its task, that's what our colleagues wrote in the abstract, to sort of open up the broader framework of this question. How do museums, particularly in their programming, position themselves politically? What does the political even mean here? I, for one, think that there is no politics without conflict. When we're talking about the political, we can never talk about it in a consensual way because politics involves conflicts at its very core. But how do we deal with this in museums? How do we deal with this in our programming? This is what we're going to talk about here in the next 1.5 hours, and I'm really happy to be able to introduce three wonderful speakers which are going to explore these questions with me together. Sonja Enz has been working at the Stapferhaus in Lenzburg for the last 10 years. She has a master in cultural studies and experience in journalism and has co-curated a number of exhibitions which she's going to talk about in a minute. Next to her is Miriam Zadov, and I'm introducing them in the order of appearance, if you will. Miriam Zadov has been director of the NS Documentation Center in Munich since 2018. Before this, she was a professor of history and chair, Alvin H. Rosenfeld Chair in Jewish Studies at Indiana University Bloomington, and she teaches at LMU Munich. She has organized and curated a number of groundbreaking exhibitions in recent years and published widely on history, intellectual history, Jewish history, etc., and particularly also on all kinds of matters of memory. Recently, in 2013, she published the book Gewalt und Gedächtnis, globale Erinnerung im 21. Jahrhundert, Violence and Memory, Global Remembrance in the 21st Century, which has been met with widespread and I think mostly pretty much positive critical acclaim. Kaya Girok is today speaking to us from Brussels, where she is an active member of the Academic Council of the House of European History in Brussels. And I'm thinking you're having meetings today and in the next few days in Brussels. Kaya teaches as an assistant professor of contemporary history and memory research at the University of Nova Gorica. And from 2011 until 2021, she headed the National Museum of Contemporary History of Slovenia. She's going to talk about this as well, and also, I guess, why she's no longer heading this museum. In 2022, she was appointed director of the European Capital of Culture of Nova Gorica in 2025. And not least, Kaya has been a member of the executive board of ICOM since September 2022. So we decided that we're going to have three concise presentations about the work of the three colleagues and the questions how political they see it, how they approach it in a political way. So we're going to hear about their work and about their perspective on museums in a minute. But for starters, allow me to ask the three of you just briefly a more sort of a more personal question. Would you describe yourself as a political person? Yes, please start.
Yes, surely. I would say I am a political person. In Switzerland, we have the opportunity to vote several times a year on political questions. And I'm convinced then that some of the questions and decisions we make in our daily life that seem personal or private have a political dimension. And of course, I like to think and talk about the shared beliefs we have, the values we have, and also to ask the question how we can shape the future together.
Okay.
Yes. I think otherwise I would be in the wrong place probably. Of course, many of the decisions we make, as you just said, even if they seem private, they're often political. We are, and that's of course part of the problem. The moment we enter a room, we are a political person. We don't even have to speak or talk. I just have to sit here, and I'm already. And everybody can, when I sit in a bus, I'm being seen as a specific person with privileges, with education, with whatever comes with that. And to reflect that, especially in our work, I think is part of a learning process that we're all undergoing right now, because it has been something we have been taken for granted for a very long time. Thank you.
Okay, what about you? And maybe I can add to this. Do you think that, question for you as well, do you see yourself as a political person, but also do you think that as a museum professional, you need to be a politically minded person?
Okay, thank you very much, and hello to everyone. I am a very political person because you skipped out my last job, which was the State Secretary for Culture in the Premier, in the cabinet of the Prime Minister, and I was the State Secretary till a month ago. So this is a very relevant question. Yes, everything for me is political, but I also realize that taking into account that everything around me is political, I can also be very active on the platform of politics, not just being or in a party or in politics itself, but also engaging in NGOs activities, and especially working in the museum field actively and being present for the questions around myself, especially in our society.
Okay, thank you very much for this first round of answers. And I guess every one of you guys can already think how you would have answered this question and how this would reflect in your museum work. But now let's zoom in on one case. And Sonja, I'm really excited to hear about your presentation now.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm very happy and honored to be on this panel today and to discuss with you how political museum work today is. Where do we stand as a society at the moment? How do we want to move forward? And what does this have to do with me? At Stapferhaus, we understand our political role as creating a space where a broad audience can come together to reflect and discuss the pressing topics of our time. In the next 15 minutes, I will give you insight in how we strive to create such a space. And for that, first, I will briefly look back at the history of Stapferhaus to give you an idea of our origins. And then I will highlight 6 methods crucial to our work. And finally, I'll discuss briefly what we know about the impact of our efforts. The Stapferhaus is not a traditional museum. It has no collection. It was founded in this building in 1960 as a site of human encounter and intellectual debate. For the first 30 years, the focus was on conferences and debates. And in 1996, Stapferhaus showed its first exhibition called Anne Frank und wir, Anne Frank and us. This exhibition explored Switzerland's role in the Second World War and invited visitors to reflect on the relevance of Anne Frank's story to their own lives. The exhibition was a huge success. and the addition and us und wir became programmatic for all following Stapferhaus exhibitions. All of them connect significant political questions with our daily lives. Following exhibitions have covered topics such as decision-making, money, and Heimat, shown in temporarily used buildings like the former Zeughaus in Lenzburg that you can see here. In 2000, oh. Oops. I don't know what's happening, sorry. Okay, now you have a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about. So yeah, here we are. Okay. In 2018, the Stapferhaus moved into its new building at the Lenzburg train station, modestly opening it as the Office for the Whole Truth, with an exhibition about fake, lies, and truth. In 2020, the exhibition Geschlecht, about sex and gender, followed, and currently we are showing Nature and Us. At Stapferhaus, we see ourselves as experts in communication, in bringing content into the room, but not as experts on the specific topics we choose. That's why, once we define a new topic, we embark on a research journey. We explore the field, identify the most pressing questions, build networks, and strive to include as many voices as possible. For an exhibition like Nature, for example, we consult not only biologists and historians, but also activists, farmers, and zookeepers, as you can see here. Then we refine our position on the issue. What exactly is the project's goal? Where can we fill a gap in the discourse, and from which perspective do we look at the topic? The answers to these questions, of course, differ depending on the project. However, what connects all our projects is we focus on the present, addressing topics that affect us all. We aim to engage a broad audience, encouraging as many people as possible to participate in dialogue. In times when debates quickly become polarized, we promote mutual understanding and raise awareness of diversity in our society. We invite visitors to question the obvious, to realize that the world could be different, and to understand that all of us can help shape the future within our capabilities. We strive to create a space for dialogue. But how do we achieve this? I will highlight now 6 aspects crucial to our way of working and show you some examples from recent exhibitions. The Stapferhaus selects its topics based on current debates, like climate change, migration, or gender. But then we always take a step back and look at the topic on a fundamental level, asking very basic questions. For example, during heated debates on migration, we created an exhibition about Heimat, exploring what is needed to feel a sense of belonging. Or in times of climate change, we explore our relationship with nature. What does nature even mean? Are we part of nature? And is nature part of us? Like this, we also want to invite and keep the door open for people that might not come into an exhibition about very political, obviously political topics such as climate change or gender. To engage people with a topic, we need to create a space that encourages openness. People need to feel safe to show vulnerability and to question their own viewpoints. That's why we invest significantly in creating a welcoming, warm atmosphere through the poetry of space. The superpower of an exhibition is that it can engage the audience with all the means of art, not just their minds, but also their bodies. In nature, for instance, we ask our visitors to take their shoes off at the start. This ritual marks the transition from daily life to the exhibition experience, connecting all the visitors as they stand barefoot on the same ground. Throughout the exhibition, being barefoot helps engage all the senses and also brings in humor and lightness. For almost every exhibition, we collect voices from individuals who share their experiences and thoughts. By listening to personal stories, we foster empathy. For the exhibition Geschlecht, for example, we traveled to 5 regions in Switzerland and invited over 50 people to talk about sex and gender. We asked questions like, what role models did you grow up with? When does your gender bring you advantages? What should change, but also what should remain as it is? We strive to involve as diverse individuals as possible. For the gender exhibition, we interviewed the queer community as well as elderly men and women. We invest a lot in creating a comfortable interview setting, taking all stories seriously and giving space for doubts, reflecting hopes and wishes. We see our mission also as sharing knowledge. In nature, statistics about climate change are in the center of the room, black on white. In Geschlecht, we started the exhibition with an animated movie about the diversity of sex, showing that hormones and chromosomes are far more complex than a strictly binary system. In the exhibition, we do not discuss if these facts are true or not. But however, visitors are invited to reflect on what those facts mean for their lives. In nature, visitors receive a compass and answer questions throughout the exhibitions, questions about their perspectives on nature and the role of humans on the planet. In the last exhibition room, visitors follow an interactive video debate about what should be done in response to climate change. They are asked to vote for different solutions. 4 types of perspectives are represented in the video: the holistic, the unconcerned, the techies, and the informed. At the end of the exhibition, visitors get their personal result based on their answers, showing where they align with each type. This encourages reflection on the values beneath political positions, and it helps understand different argumentation patterns in the current debate. As most of us overlap with all 4 types, it also softens black and white positions and shows that we are all ambivalent. I have one last point to make in my presentation, and this might be one of the most important ones and also one of the more challenging ones: keeping up the dialogue. We welcome many groups to our exhibitions, but our guides also engage single visitors in conversations. We see ourselves as facilitators of dialogue. We aim to meet visitors on eye level, treating them as experts in our present and taking their realities seriously. We listen, ask questions, and learn from them. But what if someone denies climate change or makes homophobic remarks? Where are the limits of dialogue? We try to soften extreme viewpoints and stay in conversation as long as possible. Especially with young people, we ask, why do you believe that? Where did you get that information? We show other perspectives, communicate scientific facts, but sometimes also need to make clear what you're saying right now is against the law. I remember one case in the Geschlecht exhibition when pupils insulted a member of our mediation team, and there we had to inform the headmaster of the school and recommended to addressing the incident. Anyway, there we get the impression that most of the people are curious and open with the need to share their thoughts, doubts, open questions, and ideas. So, that were the 6 aspects I wanted to highlight, but sounds nice. Does it all make a difference? Does it work to create a space for dialogue? Measuring the impact of our project is challenging. Our visitors give the feedback that the nature exhibition, above all, encourages reflection on our society. These are figures out of our visitor survey. We ask, it's a representative visitor survey we do. And other figures show that visitors spend on average more than 2 hours in the exhibition. We also reach people who do not usually attend cultural events. We reach more women than men. And on average, 37% of our visitors are groups, including many school classes. But still, how broad is the audience we reach? Looking at our Google reviews, alongside many positive feedbacks, I also found some critical voices. The exhibition's nature and Geschlecht are considered too mainstream, even in their choice of topic. I'm curious to see what reflection the next topic, health, will promote. But I want to end with a positive note. 1 year ago, we asked our community if any of our exhibitions left a lasting impression or inspired a change. Here are a few examples of the answers. One particularly memorable statement is from someone who visited Stapferhaus 30 years ago and still remembers it. She writes that meeting Miep Gies, one of the helpers of Anne Frank, inspired her to always help, never look away, and always listen to her heart. It might be a very optimistic ending of this presentation, but let's keep the hope that a museum visit can truly make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation, for these insights. And to the audience, please keep note of your questions. We're going to have some space at the end to, enter into dialogue. But for now, I was wondering, what I'm seeing here is that, of course, all these themes are political. They're very, very current. But what you said somewhere in between is that your approach is sort of to kind of tackle that which is self-evident or which seems to be self-evident and to sort of shift the perspective on that a little bit. So it's not really only the theme like climate or migration or whatever, but the way to approach this. And can you say something about your methods in a way? How would you sort of find out what the heterogeneous public would find sort of self-evident and then find sort of the spot to work on that, because I feel that is extremely complicated or is very challenging.
Yeah, it is very challenging, but at the same time, it's almost always also asking very basic and simple questions and asking them to different people. For example, working on an exhibition about Geschlecht, the queer community is very used to talk about how they know which gender they are, for example, but asking this, how do you know that? Or how does your gender affect your life? Or what do you want to change? I mean, these are not very complicated questions, but there a room opens where we can also think about, maybe it could also be different. And it's not set in stone, but there we realize that there is also a room where we can maybe change something by question the norm or what seems to be so obvious and normal.
Okay. And I was wondering, looking at you, Miriam, when you hear about these themes, the way I understand it, Stapferhaus is really free to choose whichever topic you want to approach. Whereas in your museum, you have a much more focused theme in a way. And are you sort of, envious of their the space they have to sort of choose from, or is this also in your direction? Is it really difficult to come up with new large questions without having sort of this sounding board of this space from a collection, from a specific focus, etc.?
Yeah, of course I'm envious, because if you're sort of like selection of topics or whatever you can choose from is so open, whereas we're focusing on the history of National Socialism, the regime, not so much, we're not a genocide museum, but the structures of dictatorship. But we try to find ways around that, because the problem is, of course, what you want to, as you said in your wonderful presentation, you want people to leave your museum with encouragement, with, with a call for resistance, with a call for changing things, for standing up for democracy, and so on. But what do you do if you have a permanent exhibition that basically says, well, you can lose it all very quickly and then it's gone. So what we try to do, for example, we did an exhibition on that started with the idea that we wanted to work on the persecution of queer people, of LGBTIQ during National Socialism, and then we decided that we do not focus on the time period between 1933 and 1945, but we start in 1900 and we go basically up until today because we wanted to show how diverse German society was before 1933. That there was an enormous visibility of queerness, that there was queer aesthetics, that there is a close link between queerness and women's emancipation, that all this has been erased by National Socialism and the ongoing persecution after 1945. And to kind of like, not to lighten up a difficult topic, but to bring in very subjective perspectives, we included the works of contemporary artists working on queerness. But of course, we have a completely different framework and setting, and there are some topics that regrettably would be difficult to address. But many, I think we could. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you find it difficult to come up with new political or current topics each and every year?
No, not at all.
What will be the next one?
Health. Yes,
okay.
health.
All right.
And its side effects. Yeah.
Okay, now
should we go?
The floor is yours.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Okay, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here today. As it has been said already in the introduction, museums are, of course, highly political spaces, as any public institution, in fact, due to our choices of topics, our programs, our audiences, the way we look and seek out new audiences, our location, our funding, everything is political. Yet most recently, the feeling is that museums have become highly politicized spaces, spaces finding themselves in the middle of controversies over cancellations, being criticized from both artists, politicians, also the media, and the public. And I think that, of course, is a different reality for many of us. Being the director of an institution which represents what is usually labeled as German memory culture, for us, this has always been crucial. The history of violence, a violent past, is usually contested, which means that in many countries around the globe, violent pasts are strictly being forgotten. Think of Spain's national consensus of healing after the Franco dictatorship, a past that only recently has become a matter of public discourse. Or in other cases, the history of violence is being instrumentalized for political purposes. Think of Cambodia with its history of an auto genocide which killed large parts of the country's own population. And as young artists in Cambodia claim, this memory is being politically abused to make it impossible to address the crimes of today's corrupt government. Whereas they want to address issues like violence against women, corruption, and so on, but everything seems irrelevant compared to mass murder. So Germany has, of course, an immense responsibility for remembering the Holocaust, the Roma and Sinti genocide, and the killing of other groups. Over decades, Germany has developed an institutional culture of remembrance, which evidently became influential in the 1980s and 1990s. And especially after German reunification in the 1990s, the term German memory culture was born. And this remembrance was, by using this term, in a way nationalized. Why is this problematic? It's problematic in the sense that whatever we call memory culture in Germany today has been produced by a highly international process of various groups, starting with the Allies, with survivors, with international historians, and of course also German initiatives, but not only German initiatives. The whole discourse on German memory culture is extremely political, as we see the far right attacking and challenging this culture since years, not only recently. But also because memory is not history, but it's how we present history, how we exhibit and discuss history in the present. Therefore, memory is closely connected to political and social developments today. And memory is always endangered to being instrumentalized even in democracies. Remembering past inhumanities and at the same time implementing inhuman policies today, as we see political actors do on a regular base, is extremely vexing. And it creates an ambivalent message, and an ambivalence that our audiences feel and they address. Because they see it as inconsistencies. To give you an example, if we remember refugees from Nazi Germany creating empathy through exhibitions or programs, and at the same time the media is covered in discussions on the new European consensus on asylum policies and the heartlessness that comes with it, we are struggling to convey a consistent message. So that's the general backdrop of our exhibition making, our events and educational programs. And the feeling is, of course, you can't escape the political. But to start here, we are a relatively new institution, founded in 2015, because Munich, took a little time to come to terms with its specific past. And to create this space, a documentation center dealing with the structure of the regime, Munich as a birthplace of the regime, and a responsibility that comes with it. As you can see here, it is situated in a historical space, the space of the former Brown House, the Nazi Party headquarters since 1930, and located near the Königsplatz, sort of symbolically, aesthetically, one of the most important spaces for the Nazi regime, although, of course, the center of the regime moved to Berlin in 1933. So what is going on sort of like within our building is we are called a center of learning and memory, ein Lern- und Erinnerungsort. And the general idea was to create a documentation center which, just like a Kunsthalle, doesn't have its own collection, but basically through its main exhibition passes on knowledge. What is behind that is a reference to Theodor Adorno's idea that how do we fight fascism through enlightenment, through education, through passing on knowledge. Now we've all seen that, partly we have failed, but also because Adorno did not foresee and could not foresee that we are living now in a post-factual age, that it's very much and very often about opinions and less about knowledge, and that the question of who actually is an expert to a topic is often not even asked. So we are not even asked if it comes to decision making. But but often it's about people having very strong opinions on the matter. So there is, as you can see, there is no object in our permanent exhibition. There is no collection, which is changing now. 9 years after our opening. I came 3 years after the opening, although I can see and still see, and especially today, I'm sorry, that was, I can see that, of course, today very much so is that, with survivors, with witnesses becoming sort of more and more silent, there are less people who can really talk and have this, as you said, encounter with Miep Gies. This is happening less and less. So, of course, the historical space, these historical places gain more attention. But I am sometimes doubtful, thinking of Ruth Klüger, her famous quote, as a survivor of Auschwitz, is when she criticized our expectations to these historical places. She said, like, people come to a memorial site and they find what they expect to find. They come with the images they have in mind on their journeys, and before arriving, images that people take from movies, from the media, from school, from society, from their specific and own background. So we gradually changed and turned into a space in which we see ourselves as the one who try and listen and learn. Of course, we still pass on knowledge, and I know it's incredibly important in this post-factual age, but we have been starting to listen more and ask questions of people and their concerns and their different gazes, the images they bring with them. To pass on the memory of Nazi Germany in a diverse society has become a big issue, and it has been addressed by Claudia Roth in her new concept on memory culture. People come with their own individual experiences, their traumas, their pasts of other wars, and experiences of today's racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim racism, and so on. And these have become the most central issues for us to address. So consequently, one of the decisions we have taken was to become radically open, in a sense of addressing new topics, of asking for no entrance fee. We were supported by that, of course, by the Munich politicians. We addressed new people, among them contemporary artists, which was not planned when the center opened, and I can assure you this can pose enormous challenges just to get an artwork into a building that was not built for contemporary art. We work together with people who consider themselves memory activists, and as a colleague from the Museo de la Memoria in Chile has said about herself and her work at the museum, she considers herself a memory activist, and I think partly we are that. We bring in survivors of political violence and therefore end up having a very political program. So this is just one example. This was our first exhibition on contemporary art. Tell Me About Yesterday, Tomorrow, and it was a very important and interesting experience to work with contemporary art, which sometimes is, of course, can be considered sort of a very elitist approach, but we've seen that it brought in very different audiences because of the subjectivity that the art conveys, the different points of views, the emotional, the very personal aspects that come with it. We have a very broad events program, so an events program that really focuses on politics and public discourse, and that does not only mean that we address topics like racism or anti-Semitism, but sometimes, and you can see, I think on the photo on the left, for example, inviting the last generation, That was when the last generation started throwing soup on paintings. We asked ourselves a couple of questions. So we want young people to be political and politicized. So here's a new generation that is fighting for a future for us all. We have to give them a safe space to talk. Where are the public spaces to discuss climate change when it comes to these kinds of controversies? Museums preserve the world's memory. If the planet is in danger as it is, this poses an enormous challenge to our work. And as an institution without a collection, the last generation never threw soup on any of our exhibitions. So we were in a very comfortable situation of inviting them. And then also being situated in Bavaria, we brought them together with the Bavarian Minister of the Interior, who over Christmas in 2022 decided to send a number of members of last generation into preventive custody just for threatening to do any of their performances. So we were asked, I think it was Roland Steinke who was also at the panel, he asked, like, well, you know, you're a space of memory. Why are you bringing in these discussions? And of course, because they are relevant for today's democracy. These are the controversial topics that often don't find space for discussion. So that's one of the reasons, but one of the other reasons is that the future and the past are so closely connected. So learning from the past is essential to envision a democratic liberal future. And the relevance, why would we need a democratic liberal future? That's what we learn when we look at the past and what we might lose if we're not aware of what is going on. So kind of like we have to convey the message why it's worth putting up with this messiness of democracy, because democracy is messy, and it basically means that we have to stand each other's opinions even if we don't agree, and that is difficult, and it's an important message, I think, that we as spaces of discourse can convey to a larger audience. Another topic we have addressed, and I have to say it was really a process of learning also there, was the question of right-wing terrorism, of the question of how minorities are being endangered, their vulnerability, their often not seen vulnerability, and it was a process of learning because we did not do so right away. The families and survivors of the terror attack that happened in Munich in 2016, they came to us and they said, you have to address this. So we had, in our permanent exhibition, we had a mention of the NSU, of course, but they came and said, we need a space to talk. And at first we said, like, well, you know, there are many spaces, but then we realized that actually they're not. And so this was very much a process of creating trust with people who do not trust institutions because they are so disappointed. They feel alienated, they feel not seen, they feel not represented in our public institutions and our museums. And it takes a lot of time, I have to say, to create this trust, but I think it's worth it. So I'm already coming to the end. I'll be very quick because I'm already over time. So memory is something that is changing, and this is something we wanted to address when we started using this quote by James Baldwin in 2019. History is not the past, it is the present. It goes on in our tote bags. It says we carry our history with us, so you know exactly what you're carrying. And the subtlety of addressing these issues, how political is our work in museums, how political is art, is often being discussed by Baldwin. And I think the most important things here is also that we have to be clear about the politicization of art. Art can be political. art and culture can be political, but we cannot solve every political problem in museums. And this is something we are being asked by politicians right now. And I find that extremely problematic, because saving democracy does not work by telling people you have to get engaged, by putting in front of their noses many different doomsday scenarios, because people won't get engaged then. I think that we need to do that as well, but partly also it's about showing them what humanity can do, what humanity can fix. The fact that we're living in a time that is so void of utopias, I think can really put a lot of a lot of power into museum work, because we can show people the beauty of art, the beauty of humankind, the power and the strength that lies within this. And I think that's why sometimes a lot of democracy can be conveyed by looking, I don't know, at an 18th century painting. And I find it crucially important. So to end here, the question of memory activism and maybe also museum activism, it is very much about fighting fascism, today's fascism, with so many countries going down that road. Today, 10% of the world's population live in functioning democracies. A couple of years ago, it was 17%, and I was like, 10% is really little. And what we have learned from is working together closely, for example, with colleagues internationally, especially in the past years, we've worked closely together with curators and museum directors or former museum directors in Poland, who really opened our eyes on how vulnerable the cultural field is when a democracy ceases to be a liberal democracy, and how quickly museums are becoming battlegrounds for this struggle. So these kinds of alliances, I think, are crucial in fighting for our independence as museums, weathering storms of controversy, learning from each other through this transnational work, and also being protected through collaborations. I think that is really crucial as well. It is really about knowledge, but it's also about action and activism, and about getting involved, because there is so much at stake. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam Zeider, for lots of food for thought, food for discussion. I've got many questions, and I think you really put out nicely a number of terms or thoughts that we might take with us for the next few days. You talked about a nuanced distinction between the political and politicized. We might have to sort of flesh out a little more where the boundaries are, if there are any. You talked about the messiness of democracy, violence and vulnerabilities, the trust and institutions, trust in institutions, questions of activisms and alliances. Is the museum a battleground, as Hito Steyerl has once asked? And finally, what can we do? These are, I guess, questions that we have to keep in mind and we could discuss right now. However, as we're already running a little late, I would like to really hear Kaya on that, and then we can discuss it all together. So now, Kaya, your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that I need now to share my screen. So can you see it? Okay. Can you see my screen? Can you see it?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. I will go quickly through my presentation because I know that then we can have more time for a talk. And thank you very much for the two presentations before because I learned a lot and I have so many things to say that I agree with. And we said it many times, so probably you will hear it even more through the day. I'm very sure that museums are not neutral, and I can tell this because of my own appointment at the Historical Museum in Ljubljana in Slovenia. So this is the museum where I was working for 10 years. It's the Museum of Contemporary History of Slovenia. And I will tell you a little more about it in a few minutes. But just to make this statement that I am always saying at the beginning, because I think it's really very important to say to the public where we stand as the speakers. And I think that saying everyone, when someone says that we work for the objectivity, and I think that if we say that we are apolitical, this is always a lie, because we are political and we can never be neutral, because museums are and always be the institutions that deal with a very special collections, and all these collections are not neutral. We need whatever we do, our relations between the institutions with the politics, with the topics that we deal with, and collections that we create are not neutral, but they rather express a very subjective preferences that us, the workers of the museum and the researchers and the curators exactly do. And we also have a voice, and this is the important one, and we should use it. We should always use it for the benefit of society. And during the time of radical changes, the field of interpretation of the past is the one of the first to demand or renovation or new answers, especially on the long history of nationally constructed narratives. Political and social changes require a new understanding of the past. And repressed memories, especially in the last decades, they are calling upon to build a completely new national collective memory. And this is not something that will be speaking about Slovenia, but as I said, that this is something that is an ongoing process in all the countries around Europe and the globe. We also, working in the museums today, we have this face several questions about the past, about the restitution, about the answers to the weight of the legacy in the Western European countries, about colonialism, and about the Eastern European countries, about the totalitarian regimes, and then to discover the atrocities against humanity and questions of responsibility for the heritage in times of military conflicts, and the questions of social inclusion of migrants all over the century in Europe. So these are all very interesting and very relevant topics, and they also do confirm the thesis that the museums do not exist and we don't work in vacuums. Even if we are discussing politics, and so many times I hear politically correctness, the subjectivity of the directors, of the managers, of the curatorial staff should always be addressed. And I think, in my opinion, it's a very crucial one. And for example, if we have a same collection and two different curators, you know exactly that we are going to come out with a completely different narratives. Even the same object can be in the museum field in one museum, or the same object in different museums. It can have a completely different narratives. If we go deeper into this understanding of the mission of museum, the interpretation of individual museum collection, we can see that they are always in a constant interaction with the society and its needs. And national museums in this field really have a special role because they do have the power to confirm a certain narrative. They also have the power to select several chapters and at the same time to erase other chapters or other collections out of the narrative. And in this way, they are the builders of the so-called imaginary communities. And this is not a neutral thing. We know how many scholars, how many tourists, how many people are coming to the museums and how we are, at the end, representing our national history. I'm saying all this because in 2011, when I arrived at the National Museum of Contemporary History, this was a museum with a very critical background. It was opened after the Second World War as the Museum of Partisans' Independence, saying a very strong narrative about the end of the Second World War. Then, a decade later, in Yugoslavia, it was one of the 6 revolutionary museums, so the museums which were open all around Yugoslavia to tell a very select story about its past. And in the period when Slovenia gained independence and the dissolution of the country of Yugoslavia, it was one of the rarest which remained active, and it's nowadays the National Museum of Contemporary History. So just you see, it's one building with the same collections, but in the period of some decades, it completely changed his mission. So arriving there, you already knew that you were working in a kind of a very highly selected political narrative environment. And even when I ask my colleagues while arriving why they are not discussing the migrants who arrived in the period of Yugoslavia in the 60s, in the 70s, in the economical boom, the answer was that this was not a part of the national narrative. In the period of COVID, 2020, with the right-wing government, most of the directors of the museum and cultural institutions were changed. In some cases, their mandate finished, but their engagement was not renovated anymore. So one of the first fields of the right-wing government was, in a certain way, to clean the cultural environment, the different museum directors, the different agendas. And going in my case, it was said that I was lacking of patriotism. And I would say that in a certain way, this was a compliment, saying that I was lacking of patriotism, because museum in that moment was working with a lot of European projects, being all over Europe in so many different activities. And we were doing projects which were engaging people, engaging the newcomers, the migrants, engaging into topics which were really relevant in that moment, especially for the younger generation, in how to understand the society around them. In that case, when so many cultural managers were fired, of course, in the main media, on the national media, it was no news, but on the international media, there was quite a story saying that it's really very important who discusses the past and how we are discussing it. And this is not just a vacuum, it's about what kind of a narratives the museum is going to employ in order to tell its own history and its own story. But this is not how the story ends, because in the same year, the same government opened a new museum, which is a museum just which was for the saying the story of the legacy of the Slovenian independence. There were 3 museums in the country which were already telling the story of Slovenian independence, but they decided that we needed to open a new museum that could tell the right narrative, the controlled narrative about how Slovenians and foreigners should remember this very important part of the Slovenian history. The next government merged the museum into the Museum of Contemporary History. And again, in 3 years' time, we have again how museums are changing and how the management of museums is changing just in order to control the political narrative of a national museum. And here the story, I'm not saying that it ends, but I would like to focus on a much more important thing, and this is what do we do and how do we do it? And even the politics are changing the museum narrative. What is our role as curators, as people who are working inside the museums? And you said it before, we cannot escape to be political. Of course, we cannot escape it. But at the same time, can we be relevant? Can we be responsible? Can we work for the benefit, for the ethical benefit of not just the visitors, but of the curatorial staff itself? So how can we achieve this? And in what kind of way we can be much more active on a social field? How can we be relevant to our visitors, and what are the expectations? You were also telling before that the people enter into the museums with their own values, and I agree, because sometimes what they are questioning, or they also should question coming, is their own set of values. And especially when we discuss difficult histories and difficult narratives, I think that it is really that we need to emphasize, and we should work also on the pain of the other. We should be able to prove and to understand how others are thinking about the same topics in order to present it and in order to build a much more open society and to raise awareness, and especially to give a voice to the strata, to the groups, to the socially engaged groups, which were being for decades, even longer, overlooked. And I think that this is the mission that we should work on. And each time when I am discussing these topics, with much more time to discuss it, I'm always showing this slide because I think it's important first to question ourselves. Where do we stand? What do we like? What is our set of values? And what I'm always discussing with my colleagues is when we discuss, I don't know, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the 1 or 2 most important for you. And in this way, with the staff of the museum and also with other colleagues, we can start discussing and build, a very relevant society. And what kind of books do we read? What kind of activities we would like to achieve for the benefit of everyone? And last time when I was in Florence, I found this graffiti, which I think is really very important. La politica nasce dall'amore per il luogo in cui si vive. So it means that the politics is created by the love of the origins where you come from. And this is, I think, it's one of the most important things when discussing how political we are and what do we stand for. And just to finish, and I was really quick, I hope, in the period of very rapid social changes and in the period when, in my opinion, the right government was destroying the quality of the Slovenian museums and the Slovenian culture itself, one of the best things that I could do was to raise awareness about the power of institutions and how we all have to take care of our institutions. And museum, it's not just the love for the job that I'm doing, but it's also the love for the museum institutions that I am visiting and I stand for. So these institutions cannot protect themselves. We have to protect them. And we have to build a better society by giving voice to the people that cannot have their own voice in society. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much for everyone for being so concise and so brief, but nevertheless we're already running a little late, and I know that Kaya has to leave pretty much on time on 1 o'clock. So I don't want to ask any more questions, but just open up to you. I guess there's a lot of questions in the room. So give me a sign if you have any for whichever speaker. Otherwise I'm going to continue talking. Okay.
I have a question. I see it here in Zoom.
Here in the front.
Yeah. So how can museums react to or prepare themselves for political influence? It seems like that political programming, although very important, does not prevent them from anything. We can have a huge debate about this question. I can say on my own that the best thing is first to be very honest in between the staff in the museum. I learned that the first and the most pivotal role is the role of the curatorial staff. I'm not saying that we should all be on the same side. I like to work in multi-political environment, and especially for the museums of contemporary history. I think it's really very important to have people from left, from right, from migrants background, I don't know, from many different understanding of our society, because this is the only way when we can really achieve something, to listen to one another and to question ourselves and to go out of our comfort zone. And this is probably the answer, to go out of our comfort zone.
Okay, here's a question in the room.
Yeah, I had a question to you. You said that cooperations can protect you or help you. Did I understand it right?
No, collaborations.
Collaborations.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit what you mean about it?
I think that it's really important. One of the things I think that very often when it comes to these very politicized moments, it's very hard to come to the right decision as an institution. And I think it's always a process. You have to involve other people. You have to, get counseling in a way. I just remember this one case when the libraries in Munich found themselves in the middle of a controversy because they had invited a drag reading. And it was really a fierce controversy. You probably read about it or heard about it. And they were so shocked. And it just helped them to talk about their experience, first of all, their staff, of how do you react and what happens, and to see how these also, how attacks by the media, from the political side, from many different actors on institutions, how they work, what exactly happens, how an institution can sort of defend themselves in an adequate way, because it's not just about defending the institution, but defending an idea. And I've learned a lot from, probably also now from your talk, Kaya, but also from working together with colleagues in Poland who have lost their jobs due to the previous government, and who have learned to, for example, pass on messages through a seemingly less political way, to make their position clear without being censored, which can be very tricky, but sometimes necessary. Yeah, so I think that collaborations are very helpful. And for Polish colleagues, it was really important, for example, to work together with an institution in Germany, or, for example, Polish artists that got financing through Germany because they could not get financing in Poland because they were seen as working against the national agenda. Yeah.
Okay, Alina Kromova, and by the way, you can of course ask questions in German, and also we're taking questions from the chat.
Alina Gromova, board of ICOM Germany. Being politically active, for me, it has something or something similar like being religious. For both, you need kind of community. You cannot really do it alone, just spontaneous thought. Miriam, you told about working today in a polarized society, yes, and creating a space of dialogue. And Kaya, you also told at the beginning about how important it is to work with activists. And I'm asking myself, because nowadays, it becomes more and more difficult to keep your own community, because the polarization goes through the community. And so my question is, where are you personally taking your strength? Or what are your communities which keep you going? Or where are you taking the strength to keep going?
Kaya, do you want to start?
I can start. My ICOM family is my religion. It's not a joke, but in the first year, it was really it was difficult, especially because the media were attacking me. That was for them the solution to prove that I was incapable of being a director. But the ICOM community from all around Europe, all around the world, was there for me, and they were giving me the support. So this is why I was always very interested, and we worked a lot on the European projects. And I think that the networks that we are building in between us are the one which are giving us, the power to go on and to work even harder.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would like to add, sort of, because it's sort of professionally and personally, and I think professionally we can really support each other and, for example, show each other the support we need. Like when you're being attacked, you get an email by a colleague that says, "Are you okay?" That is already being very helpful. But then, of course, we are also individuals and in our personal worlds, there are so many, we live in this polycrisis, and I see that with my colleague and my team that we're all struggling with that. We have fears for our children in, what will happen in the future or what happens in the present. And for example, after October 7, for me, the most helpful thing was that this group that we have created, or this network of people we work with Muslim groups, with Jewish groups of various types, with others, that everybody would show their support and would say like, okay, we're here for each other, despite the silences that came from all over, and eventually also with the war going on, to show, kind of like it feels like it's even more kind of like out in the open and said and talked about where are your alliances, and you try to continue talking, although it is so difficult, and to think about, creating safe spaces, or safer spaces in which people can still talk, discuss, think about, voice their concerns. And as institutions, I think we can really raise awareness for people being vulnerable, people being attacked, people questioning their lives. Like, after what happens with the collective, so many people in their families suddenly had discussions on, where would you go? Where should we go? Just to raise awareness for that in our audiences and to create this kind of empathy, I think is a lot to do. It's not easy, but I think it can be very helpful, and I think it gives us strength, and that's what I see in my team, which is of course also sort of like this working together with a group of people, even if you don't agree on everything, is already a present, I think, or something wonderful.
Do you want to add, Sonia, to that?
No.
Okay, all right. Got another question over there.
Hello. I'm Frank Schröder from ICOM Luxembourg, and I'm the head of the National Museum of Resistance and Human Rights in Luxembourg. And one of the problems is that in spite of a large engagement, political engagement of lots of museums, I think it's quite difficult to communicate this to a larger public. And one of the questions is, if you have a museum like NS Doc in Munich, this does not communicate what you are doing. We changed the name of our museum. We added the human rights to a historical museum treating World War II. But I suppose that the communication of what we do to larger publics is quite a challenge. And I suppose there should be efforts done to get a better understanding of what we are doing. And the second point is that we are working with minorities, but it's quite difficult to get them in our museums. We have contacts to some associations, but we do not get in touch with the groups we are talking about. Thank you.
Okay. This wasn't exactly a question, I think, but we take it as a comment. Thank you very much for this. I have a question actually myself. I feel that maybe that is also something for the whole conference here. I don't know, I'm sort of uncomfortable with a tendency that this saying of the museums is not neutral, or museums are political, sort of sits too comfortably with us. It's like, is this sort of a new label? Like, of course, everyone's political now, and nothing is neutral, etc. But what does that actually mean? My understanding of the political is actually that it is this which is not easily accommodated, that is this which is not easily contained and controlled. The political is something that causes trouble, that causes problems, sort of. So my question is, I guess, as a last round for the three of you, did in your political museum work sometimes something happen which you could not foresee, which you could not control, which threw you out of bounds, which unsettled your work, and then sort of started something, be it productive or I don't know, divisive or something like that? But I guess that is the point where the political actually starts. And Kaya, maybe you want to start with that, because you have to leave in like 2 minutes.
No, I am moving out of the room. But, if you can answer first, then I will be able to answer.
Okay,
last.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, whoever.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that that we have experienced situations, especially working with contemporary artists and, putting together a show with, 40, 50 contemporary artists today can be very troublesome, as you all know, because you end up having lots of political statements in your exhibition apart from the artworks, and then you might tell the artists that their artworks are political enough or speak for themselves. But nonetheless, you will find their statements, and especially now with the controversy over the war in Israel-Palestine, this has gotten much worse, and I see that curators are sort of like getting in an in-between situation, which is almost impossible, because from the political side, they're asked to do one thing, from the artist side, they're asked to do another thing. And I think one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about lately is I find it problematic when from either side there is an unwillingness to continue the conversation when it just comes to statements that do not invite a conversation, that do not allow a conversation, but say like, okay, we have to forbid this, or I'm withdrawing my artwork, or I don't know what. And that I find really problematic because it puts us in an impossible situation. I would wish for everyone to be more considerate and less quick with their statements. And I mean also from the political side, very quickly sometimes we get, I don't know, that some politician or someone who's not a professional in the sense of, dealing with a certain topic, defines something as. And then we have to deal with it. And there is less nuance and less thinking about it. And as I said, I think in democracies we have to bear with controversies. We have to allow them. And the problem is that, the moment, and this was being raised at the beginning, like we need our code of conduct and so on. But I think that every repression, everything that comes as forbidding opinions is extremely difficult, especially because we can see that one of the things that is happening, which is extremely vexing, is that with this shift towards a radical right, lots of things are not being forbidden. Okay, finally now there is some consequences if you, for example, claim that the SS was actually quite a humanistic organization. But a lot can be said on the political stage and is not being censored. And then when it comes to museums, very quickly there is this feeling that, okay, we can't fix it on a political level, let's fix it on the cultural level. Or the cultural level should fix what we cannot fix politically, because in the European Parliament we have Orban sitting next to Meloni, to I don't know who else. And this is extremely problematic. And I think that, this is something that, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I ask quickly a bit on another level, but whenever we choose a new topic and work on it for quite a long time, it influences also how we work as an institution. For example, working on nature, we ask ourselves, okay, but now we create an exhibition with a lot of projectors that uses a lot of energy, and we have a lot of emissions. So how do we deal with that question? Or doing an exhibition about sex and gender, we question our own use of language. So now do we want to use the gender star? Or, so each and every topic influences also the way we work as an institution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I know there was some more questions in the chat, but also breaks are really important, so I'm going to close it right here. We're having another 1.5 hour days to discuss all these things. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks for your wonderful presentation. Thanks, Kaya, who has left us already. Have a good lunch.